She had $20 left in her wallet and a heart full of things the world had refused to notice. An old woman walked into a place that didn't want her, and every person in the room made sure she knew it. Every person except one. The girl who handed her water pulled out a chair and treated her like she mattered when nobody else would. That $20 was rent money, grocery money, the last wall between her and nothing. She gave it away without thinking twice, because some people carry kindness like a reflex they never learn to stop. What she didn't know was that the old woman wasn't who she appeared to be. What she didn't know was that someone was watching the security footage that night with very still eyes. What she didn't know was that her life was about to crack wide open. There would be a black car waiting for her at a bus stop, a mansion she wasn't prepared for, and a man she wasn't ready to meet. There would be a woman named Jade who smiled like a weapon and moved like a threat. There would be a check for $500,000 placed on her kitchen table, with one condition attached. There would be a stolen watch, a frame-up designed to erase her, and a moment where she almost believed she deserved it. And through all of it, there would be one question the universe kept answering in its own slow, stubborn way. What happens when a woman with nothing gives everything she has to a stranger she will never see again? Or so she thinks. Colette Vance had been invisible at Ridgewell and Kern for 8 months, and she had gotten dangerously good at pretending it didn't hurt. Ridgewell and Kern was the kind of jewelry boutique in downtown Phoenix where the air itself smelled expensive and the carpet swallowed your footsteps whole. Colette showed up every morning at 7, polished the glass cases until they disappeared, and arranged diamond displays with the precision of a surgeon. She smiled at customers who looked straight through her like she was part of the furniture. Decorative but forgettable. Her manager, Dominique, had made one thing clear from the first week, with a voice like polished steel. Colette was not there to sell, she was there to serve. Dry cleaning, coffee runs, vault inventory, whatever Dominique considered beneath her. And every time Colette managed to land a sale anyway, Dominique found a way to reassign the commission before the ink dried. Paperwork mistake, client transfer, system glitch. A new excuse every time and never once an apology. The senior staff had a nickname for Colette they thought she hadn't heard. The filler. Someone who held space until a real person showed up. She heard it on a Tuesday through the stockroom wall while eating lunch alone, and she kept chewing because stopping meant crying. She didn't quit because quitting meant losing her apartment, and her apartment was the only place left where she still felt like a person. That Thursday started the same way every shift did. Slow, cold, and quietly humiliating in a way she had trained herself not to measure. Colette was adjusting a tray of platinum chokers near the front window when the door chimed and a woman walked in who didn't belong. She was old, maybe 80, moving with the careful slowness of someone whose joints had been arguing with her for years. Her coat was thin brown wool with a button missing near the collar, and her sneakers had cracked at both toes like tired mouths. Her silver hair was tucked under a faded blue headscarf, and she carried a vinyl handbag that had seen more decades than most of the staff. She looked like she had taken 3 buses and a long walk to get here, and she wasn't entirely sure she had the right address. The senior associate, Priscilla, stepped forward before the woman reached the first display case, her smile arriving like a gate being closed. "Can I help you?" she said, and the words were correct, but the music underneath them was not. "I just want to look around," the old woman said softly, the way people speak when they have already been told no too many times. Dominique appeared from the back office like she had been summoned by the scent of someone who didn't fit the brand. Her heels clicked across the marble, her perfume arrived 2 steps before she did, and her eyes performed a full audit in under a second. "This is not really that kind of store," Dominique said, tilting her head with a smile that was the cruelest kind because it was perfectly shaped. "We cater to a very specific clientele, and I think you would be more comfortable somewhere a little more," she paused, "accessible." The room laughed, not loudly, just enough. The way cruelty sounds when it wears good shoes and knows it won't be punished. Something tightened inside Colette's chest like a fist closing around a small and important thing she refused to let go of. She set down the tray, walked across the showroom floor, and touched the old woman's arm with the gentleness of someone who understood being dismissed. "Can I get you some water?" she said, and her voice was steady even though her pulse was not. The room went quiet in a different way now. The way silence changes when someone breaks a rule no one wrote down but everyone enforced. The old woman looked at Colette like she hadn't expected it. Like kindness was something she had stopped keeping room for. "That would be very nice," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word just enough to matter. Colette brought her a glass of water and found her a chair near the side wall, where the afternoon light came in soft and warm. She sat beside her, ignored the whispers from the sales floor, and smiled like the old woman was the most important appointment of the day. "Take your time," Colette said. "There is no rush here." The old woman rested her hand on top of Colette's, and her skin was soft, dry, full of years and full of knowing. "Good things find good people," she said quietly. "Remember that, even when the world makes it hard to believe." Colette did not know why those 7 words hit her so hard, but she nodded because speaking would have broken something. Then the old woman straightened in her chair, and her voice changed, not louder, just clearer, like fog lifting off a road. "I would like to see 10 of your finest luxury sets," she said. "Full sets, necklace, earrings, bracelet, and ring. The best you carry." Colette blinked. 10 full sets, and the old woman nodded with the calm certainty of someone who was not asking. She worked for nearly an hour, matching stones, checking settings, pulling velvet trays from the highest shelves with hands that trembled from effort and disbelief. The senior staff watched from a distance like an audience at a slow wreck, Priscilla whispering she's actually doing it with a grin that expected failure. "Let her," someone replied. "It'll be funnier when the old woman can't pay and Colette has to put it all back." Dominique stood with her arms crossed and her weight on one hip, wearing the small, satisfied smile that Colette had learned to hate like a recurrent. When Colette laid out the final selection, 10 complete sets glittering under the display lights, the old woman clasped her hands together and whispered, "Beautiful." "I will take all of them," the old woman said, and the room tilted sideways for a moment like the floor had forgotten how to be level. Colette exhaled and kept her voice professional, even though her heart was hammering. "That comes to $240,000, ma'am." Dead silence, and then laughter, starting at Priscilla and spreading outward like a stain across clean fabric. The old woman patted her coat pockets, checked her bag, and looked up with a gentle sigh. "My card is with my grandson. I will need to call him." The laughter came harder now, no longer hidden behind hands, but released into the room like something feral and proud of itself. Dominique walked forward slowly, savoring each step, and stopped close enough that Colette could smell her perfume mixing with contempt. "You really thought she could afford this," Dominique said, and it was not a question. It was a verdict delivered in silk. Colette turned to the old woman and spoke softly. "It is okay. Please do not be embarrassed. None of this is your fault." The old woman looked at her with calm, clear eyes and said, "I am not embarrassed, dear. My grandson will come. I just need a moment." Dominique laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Honey, you do not have a grandson with that kind of money. And even if you did, he wouldn't be collecting you in those shoes." She waved toward the door. "Security can walk you out whenever you are ready, which I suggest is now." The old woman stood slowly, without tears, without rush, with the dignity of someone who had outlived worse people than the ones standing in front of her. Colette reached into her bag, found the $20 bill she had been saving for the week, and pressed it into the old woman's hand. "Please take a cab home," she said, and her voice was the quietest thing in the room, but somehow the only thing anyone could hear. The old woman looked at the bill, closed her fingers around it, and when she looked up, her eyes were bright and full of something that resembled a promise. "You are a rare kind of person, Colette," she said, and the way she said the name made it sound like it had always been important. Dominique's voice cut through the moment like a blade finding bone. "That is it. You brought a vagrant into my showroom, wasted an hour of company time, and now you are handing out charity. Get your things," Dominique said. "You are done here." Colette picked up her bag, walked past every face that would not meet hers, and stepped into the Phoenix afternoon with no job, no plan, and an empty wallet. She stood on the sidewalk, blinking in the sunlight, and behind her, through the glass door she could no longer enter, the old woman was smiling. The estate sat 40 minutes outside the city, behind iron gates that made the cab driver go quiet and start checking his mirrors. Inside, everything was marble, light, and silence. The kind of silence that money buys and guards carefully against interruption. Weston Anderley stood in the center of the living room when his grandmother walked in. 29 years old, the founder and CEO of Anderley Capital Group. 3 magazine covers in the past year, the largest private equity portfolio in the Southwest, and a face that photographs couldn't quite get right. In person, he had a gravity to him, a weight. Like the room had been empty before he stood in it, and now it made sense. "Grandma," he said, and the corporate mask dropped so fast it made Colette's absence feel louder. "Where have you been?" She told him everything. The store, the laughter, Dominique, Priscilla, and the girl who brought her water and a chair, and her last $20 without knowing who she was giving it to. By the time she finished, Weston's jaw was set the way concrete sets, slowly and permanently. "Which store?" he said, and his voice was the kind of calm that lives next door to fury. "Ridgewell and Kern," she said, and he was already reaching for his phone because Ridgewell and Kern was one of his. His grandmother raised one finger, the girl first. "Weston, the store can wait." He pulled the security footage and watched 6 minutes of tape twice without speaking, his eyes fixed on a woman giving away her last $20 to a stranger. He had reviewed thousands of hours of footage in his career, analytics, board meetings, performance audits, and he had never once seen anything like this. "Find her," he said to his assistant Langston, and his voice left no room for questions. Colette was sitting on a bus bench that afternoon, scrolling through job listings she could not afford to be selective about, when the black SUV pulled to the curb. The window came down. A man in a tailored navy suit looked at her and said, "Ms. Vance, my name is Langston. I work for Weston Anderley. The woman you helped today is his grandmother, and he would very much like to meet you." Colette stared at him, because the name Anderley was the name printed on the lease of the building she had just been fired from. She had been terminated from a store owned by the grandson of the woman she gave her last $20 to, and the math of that made her chest tight. She got in anyway, because at this point, the worst thing that could happen had already happened twice before lunch. The house did something to her that had nothing to do with size. It was the stillness, the way the air inside felt like nothing urgent had ever broken through it. Then she saw him at the top of the stairs, and the magazines had not gotten it right, not even close. In person, he carried something the camera couldn't hold, a presence that made every room he entered feel like it had been waiting for exactly him. "Colette," he said, his voice even, warm, and unhurried. "I am Weston. I know who you are," she said, and then felt the heat crawl up her neck because the words came out like a confession instead of a greeting. His grandmother appeared from the hall with her arms open and a laugh that filled every corner. "You came," she said. "You actually came." Something in Colette loosened, a knot she didn't know she had been carrying, and she said, "You live here?" And the old woman laughed. "Not as poor as I looked, am I?" Weston watched them, his expression still, his eyes not, and something moved behind his face for just 1 second that he did not explain. His grandmother turned to him with the simple certainty of a woman who had lived long enough to know. "She is the one, Weston." Colette laughed nervously. "That is not, I only just walked in," she said, and she looked at Weston expecting him to laugh with her. He was not laughing. He was looking at her the way you look at something you did not know you had been missing until it was standing in your living room. Her heart did something she had not given it permission to do, and she pretended it didn't happen. But it had. She stayed 3 days, then a week, because his grandmother kept finding gentle reasons to need her around, and Colette could not find a reason to say no. Then Weston offered her a position, executive assistant at Anderley Capital headquarters, competitive salary, full benefits, reporting directly to him. She said no, and the word hung in the room like a door that had closed from the wrong side. He asked why, and she said, "Because I do not want to owe you anything, and I do not want anyone thinking I got here because of who you are instead of who I am." He looked at her for a long moment, the kind that has weight and texture, then said, "You would be turning down the highest paid assistant role in the company." "I know," she said, and she meant it the way only someone who has been underestimated her whole life can mean it. Another pause, then he nodded. Okay, earn it. Interview tomorrow, my HR team. No favors, no shortcuts. Just you and your qualifications. She arrived at 8, she left at 11. And by noon she had the job. Because she had always been qualified, she had only ever lacked someone willing to see it. She did not meet Iris until her 3rd day at Anderley Capital, and Iris arrived the way beautiful, dangerous women always arrive. Heels first, intention second. Iris Keating was a senior director. Her name had been linked to Weston's in gossip columns for 2 years, and her smile never reached anything above her mouth. She looked at Colette the way Dominique had looked at the old woman in the store, and Colette felt the recognition of it like a cold hand on the back of her neck. "And you are," Iris said, and Colette replied, "Weston's new executive assistant." And Iris said, "How convenient," and walked away trailing perfume and implication. It started small, a whisper here, a rumor there, and by the end of week 2, half the company believed Colette had manipulated her way into the position through the grandmother. Con artist, opportunist, charity case. The words circled the office like birds looking for a place to land, and Colette heard every single one of them. She kept her head down, worked early, stayed late, and did the job with the same quiet precision she had used to arrange diamonds nobody believed she could sell. Weston heard the rumors by day 10, and he called a company-wide meeting that made the building hold its breath. He stood at the head of the conference table, let the room settle, and then spoke with the kind of quiet that people lean forward to hear. "Colette earned her position through a standard HR process that any of you can verify," he said, and his eyes moved across the room like a searchlight. "She also happens to be the person who gave her last $20 to my grandmother, when every other person in the room was laughing at her." He paused, letting the silence do its work. "Anyone who has a problem with that can bring it directly to me. Otherwise, this conversation is finished." Nobody spoke. Iris's face was carved from marble, and Colette sat very still, feeling for the first time in years like someone had built a wall between her and the world's worst habits. This is where the story should have gotten easier, but it did not, because Iris had one card left, and she played it with surgical precision. She went to Weston's mother. Harriet Anderley arrived from Savannah 2 days later, composed, aristocratic, and absolutely certain she could see through a person in 30 seconds. She looked at Colette and saw a threat wrapped in humility, and she had not built the Anderley name by tolerating threats. That evening, Harriet appeared at Colette's apartment door with a check and a chair and a silence that had been rehearsed. She placed the check on the table, $500,000, and said the word, "Leave," the way you close a book you have decided is not worth finishing. "Not the job," she clarified. "My son's life. Take this, rebuild somewhere else. I will make sure no one follows." Colette looked at the check for a long time, long enough to feel every zero pressing against her chest like a question she already knew the answer to. Then she picked it up and tore it in two, slowly, deliberately, the way you tear something when you want the sound of it to be the loudest thing in the room. "I love your son," she said quietly. "I did not plan to, but I do. And I am not going to take money to walk away from something that is real." Harriet stared at her for a long, measuring silence, then stood, smoothed her jacket, and left without another word. But something behind her eyes had shifted. The frame-up came from Iris, a missing antique watch worth $40,000, found inside Colette's desk drawer by a cleaning crew on a Friday afternoon. Conveniently discovered on a day when Iris had been the last senior employee in the building. But convenience has a way of looking like coincidence when you want it to. The call came that afternoon. Security at Colette's door, Langston's voice on the phone. "Come in immediately." She walked into the Anderley Capital lobby and felt every pair of eyes in the building land on her at once, like heat from a fire she hadn't started. Harriet was there. Iris stood with her arms crossed and her face arranged into careful concern, and a representative from legal sat at the conference table with a folder. "We found the watch, Colette," Iris said softly, and her voice was so perfectly sad that it almost deserved applause. Colette felt the room tilt the way it does when you realize the floor you trusted was never solid. And she thought about every version of this moment she had already survived. The jewelry store, the campus jobs, every room where someone decided she was less before she opened her mouth. This was supposed to be different. She thought about walking out, And then Weston walked in, and he did not look at Iris. He did not look at his mother. He looked at Colette. "I need everyone to give us the room," he said. And the way he said it meant now. He had the footage. He had pulled it himself the night before when the math of the accusation stopped adding up and his instincts started yelling. Iris, 11:43 at night, entering Colette's office, 11:47 exiting, and between those 4 minutes, a watch traveling from a pocket to a desk drawer. He showed the footage to the full room 20 minutes later. Harriet, legal, the senior staff, all of them watching Iris convict herself on a screen she did not know existed. Iris's face went the color of paper, and she started to speak. That angle doesn't show. And Weston said one word: "Don't." Security walked her out, and the lobby was silent the way a room is silent after a storm passes and the pressure finally drops. Harriet found Colette sitting alone in the small garden behind the estate that evening, the one with the stone bench and the jasmine that bloomed without permission. She sat down beside her, uninvited but not unwelcome, and they were quiet together for a while, which is sometimes the most honest conversation two people can have. "I was wrong about you," Harriet said. "I have been wrong before, but it doesn't happen often enough for me to be good at admitting it. I tore a woman down because I was afraid of what she represented, and I know exactly what that looks like now that I have to say it out loud." Colette looked at her, and what she saw was not an apology performing itself, but a proud woman doing something that cost her, and doing it anyway. "My son loves you," Harriet said, "and that should have been enough for me from the start, and I am sorry it was not. He proposed on a Wednesday, no production, no audience, just the two of them on the rooftop terrace of the Anderley building at dusk, with the city turning gold. You gave a stranger your last $20, he said, and then you tore up $500,000 to stay, and I have never met anyone who operates like you." He opened the box, a ring she recognized because she had once pulled it from a velvet tray in a store that no longer employed anyone who had laughed at his grandmother. "I do not want to spend the rest of my life without you in it," he said, and his voice was steady but his hands were not, and that was the part that broke her open. She said yes before he finished the sentence, and the city below them kept moving, unaware that something permanent had just happened above it. 6 months later, Dominique found out the way everyone in Phoenix found out. The engagement announcement ran in 3 newspapers with Colette's full name beside Weston's. Dominique was behind the counter at Ridgewell and Kern when her phone lit up, and she read the headline, set the phone down, picked it up, and read it again. Then a second notification arrived. Anderley Capital had completed an internal review of Ridgewell and Kern's management practices, and the store manager position was now vacant. She had been fired by the grandson of the woman she had thrown out, and the mathematics of that were as precise as they were overdue. The showroom went quiet, and everyone remembered what the old woman had said on her way out the door that afternoon. Kindness outlasts everything, even diamonds. A year after the wedding, Colette opened the Groundwork Center, a nonprofit connecting people in career transition with paid apprenticeships in skilled trades and business. On opening day, she stood at a podium in front of 300 people and said, "I know what it feels like when a room decides you are nothing before you speak. I want this to be the place where that stops," she said, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had lived inside that sentence before she ever said it. In the front row sat Weston's grandmother, still in her faded headscarf, clapping harder than anyone, her hands keeping a rhythm that sounded like vindication. Beside her sat Harriet, who had become, quietly and genuinely, someone Colette trusted. Proof that people can change when they choose to and mean it. And beside Harriet sat Weston, watching his wife like she was the most important thing in any room she entered, because she was. The old woman had known it the moment Colette pressed that $20 bill into her hand in a store full of people who had already decided she was nothing. Maybe you know what it feels like to be overlooked, to work harder than everyone around you and still be treated like you do not belong in the room. Maybe someone once decided who you were before you opened your mouth, and you carried that verdict around like a stone in your pocket for years. But here is what this story is really about. Some people show you who they are when they think nothing is watching, and that is the only moment that counts. Have you ever done something kind for a stranger that came back to you in a way you never could have predicted? Tell me about it. I want to hear your story. First, How you treat people who can do nothing for you reveals exactly who you are, and the world is always keeping count, even when you think it isn't. Second, your worth is not determined by the people who refuse to see it. It is determined by what you do when no one is rewarding you for being good. Third, kindness is never wasted. It is planted, and it grows in places you cannot see until the day it rises up and changes everything. If this story moved something inside you, press that like button right now and let me know it landed. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their kindness matters even when the world pretends it does not. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that stories like this one deserve to be told and retold until they become the truth we live by. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story, because every week we gather here and remind each other what it means to be human. Leave a comment below. Your words build this community, and every single one of them matters more than you know. Until next time, carry kindness like it is the most valuable thing you own, because it is.